Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. So glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It's a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, hell yeah! So glad to have you back. Just a reminder, kayfabe is officially out. And all the TIR video essays are on Means TV. And if you'd like to check them out and all the other very good content by leftist creators, then you can sign up for a monthly or yearly membership to Means and use the discount code This is Revolution, all one word, all in caps, and receive a 20% discount. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see. Bam! This is Revolution, all one word, all in caps. 20% off a monthly or yearly subscription to Means TV. After the show tonight, we will be going into the patron-only champagne room. If you'd like to join us as well, guess what? There is a free trial for you on Patreon. That's right. You can try us out for 7 whole days, wherever you are watching or listening to this show later. There are links in the description for becoming a patron member. Now that is all out of the way, let's get to the topic at hand, which is, can America control its oligarchs? I also want to remind everyone, wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there is a link in the description to our guest Ben Burgis's unheard article. An oligarchy is a system of governance in which power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite class. In the United States, this class consists of the ultra-wealthy, individuals whose vast economic resources grant them outsized political influence. While the term oligarch is commonly used to describe the Russian ultra-rich who amassed their fortunes in the wake of the Soviet Union's collapse, it is rarely applied to America's own billionaire class. Yet, despite this rhetorical distinction, the dynamics of wealth and power in the U.S. bear striking similarities to those of post-Soviet Russia. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia underwent a period of rapid privatization, often referred to as shock therapy. This transition from a state-controlled economy to an open market facilitated the rise of a powerful class of oligarchs who seized control of key industries, exacerbating inequality and fostering corruption. While American economic transformations have not been as abrupt, recent developments suggest a form of shock therapy may be unfolding in the U.S., one in which billionaires wield state power to entrench their influence and dismantle regulatory institutions under the guise of economic efficiency. This phenomenon has been starkly illustrated by the current administration. A billionaire president has appointed the wealthiest man in the world to lead a newly established Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, an entity with no precedent in American governance. In practice, DOGE's mandate appears to be slashing government programs and public sector employment under the pretense of cutting waste. These cuts have already had tangible consequences. Reduction at the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, coincided with a surge in high-profile airline accidents, raising concerns about the broader implications of such austerity measures. Are we witnessing a new form of shock therapy in 2025? The pace of these changes is staggering. Attempted job cuts at the Department of Energy had to be reversed after officials realized they had inadvertently targeted personnel responsible for maintaining the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, a figure whose wealth has been significantly bolstered by government contracts, now finds himself in a position eerily reminiscent of the Russian oligarchs of the 1990s. What long-term effects will this consolidation of economic and political power have on American democracy? While some argue that the current administration's policies signal a shift towards fascism, Others suggest that we are witnessing something distinct, perhaps an advanced stage of neoliberalism that increasingly centralizes power in the hands of a billionaire elite. To explore these questions, I have brought on my friend, columnist, author, and professor, Ben Burgis. Please welcome, coming all the way live from a secret bunker somewhere in Los Angeles, Ben Burgis. Hey,
Hey, long time no see.
how are you?
I'm pretty good. There's some work related stuff I'm not going to talk about on air that was taking up a lot of the day, but I think I've sorted it out. And yeah, everything else is pretty good right now. I am getting ready to go in a few days to South Padre Island, Texas, to give a presentation at a conference there with my friend Michael Seckman, which there are some other extended characters, characters in the TIR extended universe who are going to be there. Cedric Johnson is the keynote.
He's coming on the show in a few weeks.
Nice. Yeah. So it's actually kind of funny. I just so the paper that I'm writing for that is, I'm co-writing, right? The paper we're going to be talking about at the conference is a response to these academic papers by William Clare Roberts and Michael McCarthy and Mathilde Dassan that are criticizing people like Adolf Reed, etc., for something that's called class abstractionism is what they're supposed to be. And I was watching a video that those three guys had done about this, and I actually noticed Cedric showing up in the chat on the video asking a question that nobody on the panel responded to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Class abstraction is what they call it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And he was like, does it matter that most of the so-called abstractionists are intellectuals of color who spent decades involved in various non-economic struggles? And like, people were clearly reading the chat, but they did not respond to that question.
I wonder why.
What?
But let's talk a little bit about white people.
Yeah. Well, focusing on white people.
Let's focus on some.
Yeah. No, we don't spend nearly enough time talking about the whites.
No, not enough. Especially because I've been watching these hood movies from the 90s all over again. But
God, as they say, center the white people. Yeah. Well, they don't make them any whiter than Russians. So like one of the things I said at the beginning of the article is, I think when you think of an oligarch, you might think of somebody like this guy, Farkhad Akhmedov, who I learned about from Rob Larson's book, Mastering the Universe.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where
he
talking
about the Russian guy,
yeah. He talks about how so this is one of the 50 wealthiest Russians. Akhmedov is an owner of a personal super yacht that features a pair of helipads, a small submarine, and a swimming pool that's so large it extends across 9 decks, which he calls his beast, right? So that's a very wealthy guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the sort of person that, again, you might think of when you hear that word oligarch. But basically, the thought that inspired the article is, this is not original to me, but I think it's something a lot of people need to hear. I think it's certainly something a lot of people who read Unheard need to hear. Isn't it interesting that we use the O word to describe Russians like Akhmedov, but we, and I mean in Americans in general, obviously like Bernie Sanders does, right? But like Americans in general don't use this terminology to describe people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, even though these people enjoy a level of wealth and political power that's just far beyond anything that their brother oligarchs in Moscow and St. Petersburg can imagine. I mean, just to put this into perspective, Akhmedov's net worth of $1.6 billion. I mean, if he were an American, like he's one of the 50 wealthiest Russians, if he were an American, he wouldn't even be one of the 400 wealthiest Americans.
Yeah, I was shocked. I looked up how many billionaires there were in America. I think it's 752 was the number that as of 2025, January 1st. And even in your piece, you mentioned that we're looking at some of these top 1% of the world becoming trillionaires. I do want to go back to the Russian. Are we witnessing an American-style shock therapy with the rise of Elon Musk's Doge and its aggressive push to dismantle the administrative state?
Yeah, I think, I mean, certainly that, a lot of historical analogies have been thrown around for what's going on right now. People, of course, love to talk about fascism. And, I think the underlying concern about authoritarianism is definitely one that I share. I mean, I wrote an article with Deep State Cuba during the election that's called "Trump Wants to Purge the Deep State so he can weaponize it," where we were, in fact, talking about very real concerns about, political repression under Trump. But, when you talk about fascism, historically, that's something that's happened when the whole that when the system is under threat, right? Because, if you're trying to shore up the system stability, I think, our kind of miserable half democratic institutions do a pretty good job of that, right? Like it's innately destabilizing to pull the rug out from under that and just, openly have a fascist dictatorship. And that's something that historically capital has only resorted to when they've been worried that they'll lose it all in a socialist revolution, like Italy in the 20s and, Germany in the 30s. And of course, we're hilariously and tragically far from that concern arising in America in 2005, when we have like a 6% rate of private sector unionization. But I do think, right? I mean, I remember actually last week I was having dinner with my little brother, and he said this, and it really stuck with me. I agree, Tony. Right? I think fascism is much more specific than authoritarianism. I think there are real concerns about the authoritarianism, within Trumpism. But he said that what this really felt like was the fall of the Soviet Union, and I think that there's something to that. Obviously, put all the salt in the world, we need much more than a grain of salt here, right? I mean, put all the caveats in the world about the obvious huge differences in starting points, right? That, the Soviet Union, as of the beginning of the Gorbachev era, was this sort of more or less fully state-owned economy. I mean, not literally every single thing, right? But, more or less. And the United States, to put it mildly, is not, right. It's in fact, Doug Hedwood has posted some interesting stuff about this lately. I've seen, if you look during all this talk about government efficiency, if you look at the actual size of government in the U.S. as a share of the economy, as a share of GDP, as a share of employment, even by the state, American historical standards, it was already pretty low, right? Before Trump took office again. So the thing that's being wrecked started out being obviously crazily smaller, right? I don't want to lose sight of that, but the wrecking process does feel a little bit similar to me, right? This sort of slash and burn, mentality that is very openly being conducted in the interests of a few super rich people, right? That, in Russia, right, as they were, in the Soviet Union, then Russia, when it split apart, you had people who maybe had been state bureaucrats before, who managed to position themselves, as they started to liberalize the economy, to build up some fortunes, and then really like made out like bandits in the Yeltsin era. And obviously that's much more dramatic, but it does strike me. I mean, we were kind of talking about this. So you and I were at this panel on neoliberalism at UC Irvine a couple days ago, and I don't think we were talking about it on the panel, but I think we were talking about it like out at like lunch after the panel, that something that we both felt was kind of missing from that discussion was that in like you sort of talk about the origins of like the sort of neoliberal turn in the United States in like the 70s. At the outset of that turn, you just don't like, nobody has hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Like, to put it mildly, right? Like that, and that's not just because of inflation, right? Like that's not a level of private wealth that anybody in the United States had built up in the 1970s. But you have this process, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, and onward, right? Where we liberalized the hell out of all of the controls that had existed before, right? Think here about stuff like Clinton taking away Glass-Steagall, to make it easier for banks to consolidate, and simultaneously, we have all these market-friendly reforms ranging from, the destruction of a lot of the New Deal welfare state and the 90s. I mean, go back to the 70s with Carter, long distance trucking deregulation, that are all things that are very, very good for building up private fortunes. And in a lot of ways, right, that sort of slow process, it seems like now we're seeing this particularly dramatic result because, you've got like, okay, I just said the Russian, who somebody accused me in the chat of trafficking stereotypes about Russians. It's like, no, man, this is a literal guy who exists, right? I didn't just make him up. This is, this is a little description of an actual human being and his fortune. But it's like, yeah, that guy, like, not only would he not be one of the 400 wealthiest Americans, but the people who are the wealthiest Americans, people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they have hundreds of times the personal fortune that Farkhad Akhmedov has. And in particular, like, people will say, oh, well, the difference is, like, when somebody like Bernie like describes them as oligarchs, I'll hear this line about how no, because the difference is that the Russian oligarchs got their money from like proximity to state power, and our very, very rich people got their money from the magic of the free market and entrepreneurialism, which is like, even putting aside the massive role of the American state in propping up a lot of the sectors of the economy that the people I'm talking about in the article tend to come from. This is also just like kind of beside the point, right? I mean, the definition of oligarchy, like, what makes somebody an oligarch isn't that they benefited from their proximity to power; it's their ability to wield power, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what an oligarchy is. It's a small group of people, wielding massive power over everybody else. And in fact, not only are they much wealthier than the Russian oligarchs, but the American oligarchs exercise crazily more political power. Right? As Rob Larson kind of talks about in that same book, when Vladimir Putin came in as president of Russia, I mean, kind of the understood deal that he was making with the oligarchs was basically like, okay, I'm going to impose some stability, which is going to be good for protecting your money, right? Because there isn't going to be so much chaos. But in exchange, you guys kind of have to take a back seat, right? Like, you're not like directly dictating what's going on in terms of policy in the same way, right? Like, I'm going to be in charge now. Whereas like Elon Musk, for example, like during the budget standoff, it feels like much longer than this, but like a few weeks ago, right? So much has been going on. We were talking about this a while back. I remember, saying like, there's that line from Lenin about how there decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. Right now, it feels like we're doing the stupidest possible version of that. But yeah, like a few weeks ago when the big budget stand-up was going on, like Elon Musk, so he's the wealthiest person in America, but I mean, also really, I mean, he's the wealthiest person to have ever existed in human history. Right? Like he has $455 billion. Nobody else has ever been close to that. And Elon Musk was taken to the major communications platform that he bought, right? So, it's his personal property, which he very blatantly uses to push his own tweets into the algorithm all the time. And he was tweeting about it like hundreds of times over the course of a few days. And in the course of this tweet storm, he started threatening that like any Republican congressman who voted for the budget deal that he was trying to torpedo, that he would personally finance their primary challenge against them. And given the amount, like just it's literally hard for the human mind to comprehend how much money $455 billion is, right? Like financing a few congressional primary challenges would not, make a noticeable difference to the overall sum, right? So people took that seriously, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that that's the kind of threat that, that carries very real weight, right? So it's like you have people who are much wealthier than their Russian equivalents, and also, much less restrained in their exercise of influence over the political process.
How do the U.S. tech billionaires and other members of Trump's administration's economic elite compare to the Russian oligarchs of the 90s? Do you think Elon's going to go on a buying tear? Is Linda McMahon gonna take over the Department of Education and have it privatized?
I don't know, but it is very funny to me that Linda McMahon is in the mix. Like as somebody who watched way too much wrestling in the 90s.
Yeah, you don't think Hulk Hogan's going to be part of his administration? Does he have a job in the cabinet?
Not yet, but yeah, that was definitely the moment last year when I felt like the walls of reality were getting a little thin. That when Hulk Hogan at the Republican convention, like tearing off his shirt to reveal the Trump shirt underneath. That's like something in like a well, it was WWF back then, but like a WWE press conference I would have watched when I was 12.
Well, Betsy DeVos to Linda McMahon, I feel like in 2016, there was a lot more talk about the nefarious nature of Betsy DeVos. I don't hear too much talk about Linda McMahon. Why do you think that is?
Because too much else is going on. Honestly, that's my best guess. I mean, I just think that that they're just sort of flooding the zone with crazy shit every 30 seconds. And it is actually kind of, it is actually part of the conscious strategy that people are so overwhelmed they don't even really know which parts to respond to.
Is that good or bad for the American people, though? If you don't know, if news is trying to capture the story, then they're just going to follow Elon and Trump, right? Because those guys are just going to do things. That's why I wanted to note in that introduction that as they tried to cut staff in the Department of Energy, when they found out like, oh, these guys watched the nuclear stockpile, then we have to hire them back. A lot of these moves that we hear about in the news are preemptive. We don't hear about the stopping or even the fighting against these moves. So is that more scary that these guys are taking up so much oxygen?
Yeah, I think it might be. I mean, that Department of Energy thing, I mean, man, that detail sounds very post-Soviet to me, right? Like, all right, there's the nuclear stockpile. Hire them back, right?
It's insane, right?
Yeah, it is insane. It's really insane, and I mean, the fact that there have been mass firings going on at the FAA, like even after all these big dramatic plane crashes, is is wild. I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, so getting ready to get on an airplane. I just keep reminding myself, okay, statistically, it's still, you know.
This is a good comment.
Yeah.
Hot beef
I'm
Polish.
old enough to remember Linda McMahon getting kicked in political ads.
I mean, she did run. She ran a very unsuccessful campaign for senator, congressman, right? It was a Congress campaign.
Yeah. And I mean, the crazy thing about this, I mean, just to run with this metaphor for a second, is I just a little while ago read Vladislav Zubov, I think that's the name of the guy's book, Collapse, you know, about the end of the USSR. And, you know, like, this is basically by the end, right? Because the Gorbachev economic reforms didn't work the way that they were supposed to. And in a lot of ways were done in a really inept way. And so, you know, the Soviet Union was hemorrhaging money, and they were kind of constantly going to the West for loans and increasingly not getting them, right? And even Yeltsin, when he first took over, really thought that, okay, now that we're going to be, you know, now that we're joining the free world, right? You know, we've completely thrown off all of the communist stuff, and, you know, and we're going to be a, you know, capitalist democracy. That means that, of course, now the West is going to, like, save us economically, right? Like, that they'll give us, you know, that they'll like invest money into the post-Soviet Russian economy to, you know, to help us out. And I mean, he was really shocked, you know, when they didn't. And so, like, when you think about the way that those sort of rapid fire privatizations and, you know, and that just brutal transition happened in post-Soviet Russia, like, I mean, that was something that was really imposed on them, right? Like, because they were, you know, they were a defeated power. And it's just crazy to think about the this completely voluntary, self-inflicted version, right? That you know, it's which is, you know, also like Trump when he first ran in 2016. As hard as this may be to remember, like, part of the appeal of Trump was that he, you know, he wasn't supposed to be like a normal Republican. That he was, you know, like, he wasn't going to touch entitlements. You know, he didn't have that sort of those obsessions that Wall Street Republicans had with budget cutting. I mean, that was part of the package when he first started running in 2016. And also he was anti-war, right? Which is amazing to think about now that he says he wants the United States to take over ownership of Gaza.
But he wants to do it in a non-war-y kind of way, right? He wants to do it in a very non-war-y way. Just
yeah, that's what he says. It's a little hard for me to track how that's supposed to work, because
he's going to evict him. He's going to evict him like he does all brown people. Sorry.
Well, I'm pretty sure that that most brown people who live in areas that are subject to Trump Organization real estate development don't have, like, long-standing armed factions to do, you know, suicide bombings, you know, and guerrilla attacks, you know, on the developers. So that might be a disanalogy between these two situations.
I mean, he's going to be hoping they just form a tenants union.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's like he's saying that the United States is going to take long-term ownership of the bloodiest conflict zone on the planet and also force everybody to leave, but also that's going to happen without any soldiers having to, you know, be on the ground in a totally bloodless way. So
it's going to be really nice. It's going to be really nice. I've watched that press conference like you watched that press conference, and I was like, how does anyone take this man seriously? And also, I hope he's not being serious right now, because you never know with him.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think that, like, one of the real oddities of the Trump era, and like not even just the Trump 2.0 era, but like the whole time, right? Like the last 10 years of American politics, since it came down the escalator, is that usually with any politician, their enemies will think that they're like lying a lot of the time, right? And their defenders will be like, no, they totally mean all of this. But with Trump, everybody, including supporters, just takes it for granted that there's like a certain percentage of what he says that's just bullshit, that he doesn't mean it. They just disagree about like which things that he say go in which box.
Is it a little different this time around? Does he mean it a little bit more, or is this just the same guy that constantly talks out of his ass? He's been talking out of his ass for 80 years.
I mean, he does talk out of his ass a lot. But then sometimes he actually does stuff, right? So again, everybody, like, everybody, even his most fervent supporters, takes it for granted that a certain amount of the time he's just talking out of his ass. But then the question is always, which things does he say? Does he mean? Does he not mean at all? Which ones does he kind of mean when he says it? But then like he'll get easily distracted and he'll forget about it. Which ones, it's just a matter of like, who he has a conversation with when. But I will say that he has been doing a lot more, right, in the last few weeks than he ever did before. I mean, by a crazy amount, right? I mean, like the, example that's sort of certainly given my interest that's most striking to me is, with labor, that when Trump was president the first time, he just did what any Republican would have done. I mean, he did what like Mitt Romney would have done as far as labor stuff as president, which, certainly what George W. Bush had done, right? Which is to say, like, he appointed really awful people to the National Labor Relations Board, and they made a bunch of really awful anti-union decisions. That's what you would expect a Republican president to do. But Trump this time, illegally fired Gwen Wilcox, an NLRB member, which it's like, if you look at the actual text of the law, it just could not be more explicit. You're not allowed to do that, right? You can only fire people with cause and with notice, and they're not really claiming any of that. So it's just blatantly like, you're not allowed to do this, but it takes the NLRB below quorum. So anything regional offices can do is still happening, but anything you need a board decision to do is not happening because they're below quorum, which means that they can't contest the constitutional challenge that's currently working its way through the courts from Elon Musk's company SpaceX, which says that the basic enforcement powers of the NLRB are unconstitutional. And they right now they're below quorums. They can't even fight that. So it's entirely possible we're entering into a world that functionally doesn't have an NLRB, which would mean that if you get fired for trying to organize a union, then maybe you can like take your boss to court through the regular court system, and in 5 years, right, when it's wound its way through the court system, maybe they'll rule in your favor and you'll get your job back. But good luck supporting yourself and your family until that happens. And of course, everybody else will see what happened to you, and they'll get the idea, right? So I mean, that's like a really dramatic example, right? The sort of basic protections of workers' rights that have existed since the New Deal, right? Since the late 1930s are being just gutted in this like really brutal way. There are entire departments that are being de facto shut down, right? Everybody's, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a dramatic example because, this is something that is, I mean, if you actually cared about government efficiency, the total amount of money being, that's in the budget of this department right now is like well under, or, not right now, but, before Doge took the axe to it, was less than $1 billion. And they'd like return $20 billion to people by like, cracking down on like junk fees and, and getting companies to like refund bullshit that they never should charge people for. And so if you actually cared about government efficiency, this seems like it'd be a model of efficiency. But they've essentially shut that down, right? I mean, Elon tweeted out CFPB RIP. So for example, CFPB was in the process of implementing a rule against including medical debt on credit reports, and they stopped them from doing that, right? So there's an axe to that. Even something that conservatives have often expressed concern about, which is debanking, right? That you can you think about like what happened to like people in the trucker protests in Canada that they had bank accounts taken away, right? The CFPB was actually cracking down on debanking, but it's they don't actually like, that's something that like, Mark Andreessen can go on Joe Rogan and talk about debanking, and Joe will be like, oh, wow, that's terrible, right? But it's like when push comes to shove, like, Trump and Musk don't care about that. They care about making sure that, banks and credit card companies can do whatever they want to.
Which is part of my next question. The mainstream media often attributes Trump's victory to right-wing populism. Yet this administration appears to be engaged in a transparent, systematic effort to dismantle the state. How is this resonating with the American public? Has the entrenched polarization between MAGA supporters and liberals obscured the material consequences of these policies, in your opinion?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think I have seen poll numbers where certainly Musk's personal popularity has taken a big hit. I mean, I know you are starting to see even like Republican congressmen who are sort of very like gung ho about the General Doge program, but like are still sort of quietly lobbying and trying to protect like money that's actually in their districts, right? As you would expect, because people in the district are pissed about some of the cuts that are going on. I mean, how all that plays out in the long term, is as far as like public attitudes, I don't know, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have a crystal ball, right? Like I'm not in that business, but I do think that, kind of regardless of how or when it gets processed in public opinion, the idea that there's something that's like populist about this is really bizarre to me. A book that I always recommend people read about, if you're actually curious about populism, Thomas Frank, wrote a great book that came out like 5 years ago called The People Know, A Brief History of Anti-Populism. And he spends a lot of time talking about the original populists, the people who coined the term in the 19th century, the People's Party, which, was, they weren't socialists, but, it was a movement mostly of poor farmers who, were being ground under by big banks and, big business. And they did try to build bridges with the urban working class. They had support from people like Eugene Debs, who would, go on to become, the main standard bearer of the Socialist Party, when that was founded. They're like the original populist program. I mean, besides the stuff everybody remembers about, switching from gold to silver to make the money supply easier, like had all this stuff like in it, direct election of senators, shorter work week for urban workers. And so it is kind of crazy. Like if you just think about the fact that this is where the word has come from, that just somehow over the last century or so, it's just become a word for like everything and nothing, right? Like what, what is a populist?
Postmodernism. It's like everything and nothing.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's like, what does that mean, right? Like it's like a lot of people, I think, under the influence of like the Hofstadter, right, the paranoid style in American politics, a lot of people basically use populism as a word that means like mob-driven, dangerous stuff, right? Like that's kind of what they mean, which is why you end up getting all these centrists who, it's like, oh well, there's the right-wing populism with Donald Trump and the left-wing populism with Bernie Sanders, and they're both like dangerous and unreasonable, right? Like that's so it's like social democracy and like right-wing anti-immigrant demagoguery just kind of become conflated into being the same thing. And what on earth populism means at this point is anybody's guess. But certainly if you think that populism has something to do with siding with ordinary people against wealthy elites, I mean, right now, again, literally the wealthiest man who's ever existed is empowered to essentially shut down entire parts of the federal welfare and regulatory states, and is doing exactly that. And by the way, if you want to talk about populism, like the arch enemy of the original populists was William McKinley, who was the like when like the populists had their high point in the 1890s. I think like the 1892 election, they did really well. It was like one of the only third parties basically since Abraham Lincoln, after that, right, that's like actually won a state in the Electoral College. They won a few. And then in 1896, they didn't run their own candidate because they lined up behind the Democrat, William Jennings Bryan, partially because Bryan had adopted a lot of the populist program, but also partially because they were terrified of throwing the election to William McKinley because they hated him so much. He was like the representative of the big banks, the big businesses that they hated. And he was, which was like, I mean, one of the things I really remember from that Thomas Frank book is he'll talk about how like pro McKinley editorial cartoons would like portray like the populists as like peasants in like French Revolution outfits, and they refer to William Jennings Bryan as William Jacobin Bryan, right? So this was like the empire striking back, and and when McKinley was elected, right? He did. We got years and years of we got Spanish American War and years of very pro business policies until he was assassinated by an anarchist factory worker. Which I bring all of this up because Donald Trump has developed this weird obsession with how much he loves William McKinley and identifies with William McKinley. Like he, last year I listened to all 3 hours of Trump's sit down with Joe Rogan because I was writing about it for Jacobin, and there was like a whole thing in there where Trump was going on about how much he loved McKinley, and because McKinley was all about tariffs, and McKinley, he spoke so beautifully about the tariffs, and then and then in Trump's inauguration speech, he spent like 2 paragraphs talking about William McKinley, and he, changed the name of the mountain back to Mount McKinley. And it's like, okay, Trump clearly sees himself in this guy, and he was like the supervillain going up against 19th century populism. So it's like, I don't understand how people are still using that word to describe him.
Or why no one's pointing out that fact. We're talking here a little bit about the NLRB. What would weakening the NLRB mean for labor organizing in the U.S.? Can workers effectively organize outside of the NLRB framework?
Well, I better hope so. I mean, this is this is the this like conversation I keep having with people who are like in the like capital class, been doing it in LA, that like it's like, okay, we all thought accelerationism was dumb as shit before, but it's like now you better hope they were right. Like we're in that scenario, so let's just hope it plays out that way. I mean, look, I would love to believe that there's going to be some huge wave of labor militancy now that these protections are gone, that people are going to resort to more aggressive and militant tactics, and but I don't believe it, right? Because that would not be my prediction. Because like the basic fact here is that it's already so hard to organize a union in the US. It's so much harder than it is in other comparable countries. Like the whole process is so stacked against union organizing. You have to, like, you think about the whole thing, like even after you've gotten a majority of the people at a job site to sign union cards, you're like a quarter of the way there, right? Because you have to, there's a period between then and the certification election. Between then, I mean, under, previously, right, they'd been cracking down on this, but like, obviously that's been reversed, right? They're between then, the boss is allowed to force everybody during working time to go to captive audience meetings where they threaten to, I mean, they're not supposed to say, well, like you'll lose your jobs if we get the union, but they certainly insinuate it. And I think a lot of times they just say it because, like, there's very little enforcement. And so there's like, oh, it'd be really a shame if like we had to shut down this location because you guys unionized. And then if despite that, they win the certification election and then actually, okay, so you're bargaining for the first contract and the company can just drag their heels forever in negotiation. Like theoretically, you can go after them for unfair labor practices for that. In practice, like your big leverage, of course, is that you can go on strike. But even after you've had a strike like the strike authorization vote and then actually going on strike, there are cooling off periods at each of these steps that are mandated by law. You're not allowed to go on sympathy strike. So like, if there are, one group of workers represented by one union local can't go out on strike to help another group of workers. That's illegal. But it is completely legal to hire permanent replacements for striking workers. You can't fire people. That would be against the law. But you can permanently replace them, which is a subtle distinction, right? Being
Weird
fired
distinction,
and being replaced. Like
the legal wordplay, right?
Yeah, basically, because it's like, I guess theoretically, if your permanent replacement quits, you get your job back. But like, that's who knows if and when that would happen, right? So I think so it's already so difficult, right? Like, and there's so many impediments to this happening that it's like kind of a miracle that it happens at all. And then if you throw into that mix now, you could, like, it's going to be so much easier to fire people for trying to organize unions. Because again, even if the courts rule in your favor, that can take forever. It can take years, right? Like it routinely does take years if you have to go through the court system, and the NLRB can't just reinstate you. So, it's like, I think it's a very, like, as an employer, if you fire somebody and then, 5 years later, it turns out you have to give them their job back with back pay, still may be a pretty good investment for you, right? Like as far as intimidating everybody else. So yeah, I mean, I think that, like, given how hard it is, making it much harder, again, I hope, like, at this point, you just have to hope that we're wrong about this, right? Like that it is going to lead to this wave of labor militancy. But I think people really underestimate, like, how easy it is to get people to take big risks about their paycheck. Like people, like, it's very easy to like sit on podcasts like this and talk about what people should do. And, it's like everybody should just go on a wildcat strike. We should have a general strike. It's like, yeah, sure. But like if you actually think about the logistics of trying to convince people to take that risk with like their ability to pay for rent and groceries, like it takes so much, like so many years of organizing to build up to the point that you have any potential for that.
Was the West Virginia, sorry to cut you off, was the West Virginia teachers strike during Trump's term? Because that was a wildcat strike, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. That was the Eric Blank wrote about that. That was it called Red State Revolt, right? It's this book about the teachers strike.
Eric Blank is coming on the show March 18th.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, wasn't that during Trump's administration?
Yeah, I believe it was. I think that's right. Yeah, that's the so yeah, no, that happened. It can happen, right? I'm not like I don't want to sound like I'm saying that these things can never happen, right? They clearly can happen. They do sometimes happen. I'm just saying that it's like there's a reason why it's rare. And the point is not to be defeatist, right? And just say don't try, right? But just like be measured in your expectations about what's going to happen in the short term, right? That like I think that with the West Virginia teachers, I mean, my understanding of some of what went on there, right, is that you did have. I mean, it's a really weird situation because they sort of had an established union, but not really. Like it was almost more just like a professional association, but there was still like I think years of like kind of informal organizing to lay the groundwork for that wildcat strike to happen. I mean, these things don't happen overnight usually. And again, like I think the point is not at all to say it's hopeless, don't try, right? Like you should try, right? Absolutely. It's just that like when people sort of very cavalierly throw out this, oh, good, right? Like it's great. Like, so we'll all of these like miserable reformist half measures that like made things all nice and peaceful are going out the window. And now we'll have some real class war. It's like, I just think oftentimes that's an assessment that's very disconnected from realities on the ground. And I don't think it really serves anybody to give people, an inaccurate impression about this. Right. Like, and actually, by the way, just one more thing. I do want to address that chat that popped up a little while ago, the New Yank thing about, why is everybody saying, solution is union organizing? I think two things can be true. Right. And this is not maybe this is not like comforting, right? But I think it is true that it's really, really hard to do like effective militant labor organizing. And also it's our only hope, right? Like it's a very narrow, winding uphill path, but it's also the only one that gets us where we want to go. Because if you think about what the levers of power that ordinary people have within our system, I mean, there's electoral politics, which is very, very like stacked against us, as of course the American left learned multiple times in the last several years, and is also like there are like not a lot of successful examples around the world of left electoral movements that didn't have a base in an organized working class at the point of production. And then there's this riots, I guess, but I've got to say it seems to me that we've run that experiment and riots really don't do much. And then there's the big one, which is that people, that workers have the ability, because their structural location, to shut down the machine, right? I mean, if you have there's nothing that people who are like unhoused and desperate on the streets can do that's going to shut down the system, right? They just don't have that capacity, right? There's nothing that there's nothing that journalists can do, right? That's going to do that, right? But but I think that workers on the job do have this capacity, right? If you can organize them collectively to exercise. I mean, that is like the lever of power that we've got. So I think it can simultaneously be true that it's much harder to build up a workers' movement to the point that you could have things like some massive wave of wildcat strikes. It's much harder to do that than people often imagine, and also it's the only way forward. I think, unfortunately, both of those can absolutely be true.
Well, our friend Ben Fong, my editor over at, I think he's both of our editors over at Damage,
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
wrote something kind of interesting, and I wanted to end with this. Maybe this will give a little hope. See what you have to say about this.
Yeah.
We have found many promising experiments out there in California. A recently established fast food council could create the regulatory conditions for state level sectoral bargaining. In Arizona, healthcare workers have formed an organization of 2,000 dues paying members around the citizen driven ballot initiative process. In Minneapolis, a work center is partnering with unions in a novel use of a labor standards council in the construction industry. These experiments and many more are seeking to empower workers and redistribute wealth outside of the NLRA framework. Some are changing conditions in certain industries so as to make the NLRB election process a more feasible one. Many have notable successes to their name and could scale and become sustainable under certain conditions. I won't read the whole piece, but that's a piece from his. I think he wrote something in Jacobin recently about that. I don't know if you got a chance to check that out.
Nice. No, I haven't seen that, but I'm a big fan of my fellow Ben's work, and in Jacobin and in Damage. There's an article of his I quote all the time. It's like that, something called The Case for Socialist Minimalism. That's like kind of about why you don't have to have an opinion about everything, which I think is something that people need to hear more online. And I think that it's I agree with you, Tony. Right? He says was no NLRB when CIO exploded. It can happen before, it can happen again. I think that's absolutely right. I think that has to be the big takeaway, right? That it's not that it's impossible for it to happen, right? It's just that, look, I mean, this is not rocket science. If you make it easier to fire people for union activity, union organizing becomes harder. That's just true, right? And this is, if you're going to have a serious conversation about the power of these oligarchs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk over American economy, politics, and society, the only serious way to have that conversation is by thinking about, okay, what are the sources of countervailing power that could block them, right? I mean, if you're going to answer the question about it, I didn't write the title, but the title of the article you used is the title for this episode, right? Can America control its oligarchs? Well, I mean, the best hope of exercising some sort of countervailing power over those American oligarchs is through the power that ordinary people have through their jobs, right? Through their position in the economy. And so if we are entering into a world without the NLRB, which, who knows how all this work is going to play out in court, but as of this second, that's what looks like it's going to happen, right? Then, you don't just give up on exercising the one meaningful lever of power that we have, right? Like you double down on it, right? I mean, like if it's just because, like, the fact that something is hard is not a reason not to do it, right? Like it's, I mean, if it's really, I don't know. I mean, if you're taking a class and you've got a big test in 2 days and you don't feel prepared, right? Like the fact that it's going to be really hard to study, right? You're going to have to study really hard for the next 2 days. This is not a reason to just blow it off and go to the movies, right? It's like, it's going to be hard, so I'm not going to do it, right? Like, if you need to pass, right, then you should spend the next 2 days cramming, right? Like if the only way that we can exercise meaningful countervailing power is through this, structural position of workers, which it is, right? I mean, Kushlik's comment in the chat is absolutely right. Like, I think the sort of like Deleuzian kind of left intellectual obsession with like the marginalized for the sake of being the marginalized totally misses the point, right? I mean, the more marginalized you are, the less power you have, right? Like that, like what we should be trying to figure out is who has both the interest and the ability to do something that could exercise power to bring about what we want, right? So if we don't have legal protections to do this, then we're going to have to make the best effort that we possibly can to do it without legal protections. But we can't, like, if you're going to be serious about this, like, you know, nobody has shown like what plan B is, right? Like what is the at all meaningfully realistic way besides worker organizing that we could exercise some kind of collective power over the system as you know, as just regular people who don't have individual economic power, you know, that, you know, who can only have it collectively, right? There is no plan B. This is it, right? So yeah, I think that, you know, maybe some of what, you know, Ben Fong is talking about is going to be relevant. Maybe that West Virginia strike is going to be a sort of inspiring antecedent. You know, maybe
no one's talking about that though, right? I haven't heard. Look, I don't watch all the shows. I don't read all the papers. I don't know if people are actually bringing up West Virginia as a touchstone to say during this administration and what they were doing, especially with education 8 years ago, this strike happened and these concessions were made, and that set off kind of a domino effect of strikes in large major metropolitan areas. Los Angeles County had a big strike. Oakland had 2 strikes. And the last strike they had to do with housing for the students was one of the things that they were calling for. I think that was a different moment. And I think this moment is a darker moment. This moment feels like one of almost retreat. If we were to use an analogy of a movie, I would use one of my favorite, Empire Strikes Back. This definitely feels like, you know, Luke just lost his hand on carbonite, and they kind of go off into the atmosphere for the next how many years it is in the Star Wars universe.
It is definitely, it does tell you something that by far the best one of those movies was the one that Lucas neither wrote nor directed. But
wow. Look, I'm not look. You can go on your show and talk all your bullshit about George Lucas, but in this house, all Georges matter. Fucking all episodes matter. We watch the animated series.
Yeah, but no, look, I mean, this is. I mean, yeah. Look, I mean, it's better. You know, I just, so I want to say 2 things here, and there's like a certain balance between them, right? Like that one of them is that I kind of hate the sort of flippant, poorly thought out accelerationism that you see a lot of people on the online left express, that like, you know, it's like, oh, it's actually good that horrible shit happens because that'll make people like rise up and, you know, whatever. It's like, well, not necessarily, right? And also, meanwhile, it's going to be really horrible. You know, it's all else being equal, it's better to not have your hand cut off or be frozen in carbonite, right? To run with that analogy, you're probably going to be better off and in a better position to fight the Empire if neither of those things happen to you. But if they do, right, then yeah, we're gonna, you know, we're gonna need. You know, we're gonna need you know, Luke to get the artificial hand, and, you know, Leia to put on the bikini and infiltrate Jabba's palace, and you know, like that's got to be the move, right?
It's just what it. It's just where we are right now. Okay,
exactly.
We're at the Shadows of the Empire level. Do you know that Shadows of the Empire, Ben? Mister, I like to shit on George Lucas. Do you know Shadows of the Empire? Do you know who the fuck Dash Rendar is? Do you?
This is last night. Jason was on the post game on my show, and we watched. I've already forgotten who's the actor. Joe.
Wait, which actor?
No, the guy, the parking space, right? My husband.
Oh, John Anderson.
John Anderson. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's like, she just like, this woman just keeps on like there's this guy who's like parked in street parking. He's allowed to park there, right? And public street parking. And this woman comes out and indignantly demands that he moves his car and says, you know, do you know who my husband is? My husband is John Anderson. Do you want me to get John Anderson out here?
My husband, John Anderson.
Do you not know who John Anderson is? Right? So it's like, yeah, that's what you're doing to me. Are you not familiar with Dash Rendar?
In the year of our Lord, 1995, it was a great year. I graduated from high school. That's all that matters. Go Cougars. There was a book and a video game. I think maybe the video game came out too, called Shadows of the Empire, and it was a storyline that takes place between Empire and Jedi. That, of course, couldn't be made because those actors would have had to be young during that time. Sure. And there's some characters that are introduced, and one of the characters is a scoundrel named Dash Rendar that has a ship very similar to the Millennium Falcon. And Leia is infiltrating, Luke is training, and the story is, I forget what Dash Rendar is supposed to find, but there's this criminal mastermind named Prince Zizor. And Prince Zizor was on a 3-way call with the Emperor and Darth Vader. Okay. Unbeknownst to Darth Vader. And Zizor finds out in the call that the son of Skywalker must never become a Jedi. And Zizor knew Anakin before Vader, right? So he's like, oh, word, dude has a kid. I'm going to find his kid and kill him or take him hostage because I need to be the dude next to the Emperor because I can further my criminal empire and just I could be Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So that is someone's going to say in the comments that I fucked it all up. That's fine. I don't remember it that well. It's been 30 years since I cared about Shadows of the Empire.
Sure.
New React says Scissor is an allergy medicine.
What?
I said it's an allergy medicine. You're just making shit up. No, this is green, and his name is Prince Zizor. Look it up. We'll look it up in the champagne room.
It does kind of sound like it could be allergy medicine.
Did you put this comment on the screen?
No,
did I do that on accident? How the fuck did I do? Ben's residency in Mexico was going well until he spoke out against George Jefferson. Can he choke people over Skype? But can't hear someone else breathing on the conference call. It's real, everyone. I am not making this up. So do you remember the Power of the Force toy line in 94, Ben? Where it was like buff Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, I should remember that. Yeah.
The extended universe, they started coming out the next year. And the next year, because that was a book, the two big books post the movies are Heir to the Empire, which is about Luke afterwards, and there's like a dark thing about Luke, and Shadows of the Empire, which is that in-between story. And they made toys for those. So as a young man, I lost my shit. I was like, there's a Dash Rendar action figure. What the fuck?
Yeah, I remember the Timothy Zahn novels that were like I guess those were set after the original movies.
Yeah, I believe he wrote Heir to the Empire, which is the first one after Jedi.
Okay, yeah. Now I remember actually reading that back whenever that came out, but I was very excited about that because I like in the in the Burgis household, the trip to the video store to rent all 3 of the Star Wars VHSs was at least an annual thing, and with great excitement, right? So yeah, I was like, oh shit, there's new Star Wars stuff.
Oh, dude, fucking if you ever got bored and went down the rabbit hole of Shadows of the Empire, I think you would dig that storyline. It's actually a cool little storyline, and it's sad we could get a movie of it, Right? They could do it like they did the episode of The Mandalorian where they brought Luke back.
Uh,
I don't know if I'd want to see something that's CGI'd. Someone says they like their non-buff Luke Skywalker. The best Luke Skywalker is Bespin Luke Skywalker with the brown outfit and the blue lightsaber toothpick and the gun. Best Luke Skywalker. That and the and Hoth Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, Heir to the Empire is the first of these books that I was thinking of. That was 1991.
Yeah. That's what I said.
Okay.
Yeah, heir to the or heir of the. Is heir to the Empire? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Man, I'm
sure they're all at your parents' house.
Yeah, Jason, having been there, knows that they those my parents do not throw away books.
Good people. Well, look, Ben and I are going to go in the champagne room. You guys can join us. Patreon.com/Bitterlake Presents. For $3 a month or $30 for the year, you too can have access to champagne rooms past and present. Join us for our call-in champagne room Thursday night. Join us for our movie nights, which we need to have more of in 2025. We don't have enough movie nights. I think we should watch Lean on Me on movie night.
Okay.
There's nothing more ridiculous than that movie. And I think we're coming back to a time of Lean on Me style teachers. So
yeah, we you know what else we need to do? I was just talking to Ryan Zickgraf, and he asked me, it's like, oh, do you still do movie streams? And I was like, man, it has been fucking forever since I did like a movie episode with Jason and Trey. Got to do that.
Yeah, we told you what movie to watch. You haven't watched it.
Yeah, I do actually need to watch.
You have to watch. Ben Burgis has to watch Life Force. So if you guys are hate or love Ben Burgis, doesn't matter. Just flood his social media with pictures of Matilda May in Life Force, and then he'll watch it. But you guys have to do that. Just spam him now on Twitter. Unlike me, he has it on his phone. And ding, 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 ding. You're going to hear it going off the whole time. Spam him right now with images of Matilda May. He will watch that movie. If you guys don't do that, we'll never get it done because he's never going to watch it. He's going to be too busy living his life, doing his jobs. But seriously, we're going to the champagne room. We'll see you guys there. Ben, I sent you the link, right?
You did?
Okay. I'm more on top of it than I thought I was. All right. And on that note, we are